The mop bucket wheels squeaked against the polished concrete as Vasquez pushed it down the sterile hallway of DEVGRU headquarters. 3:47 hours. The night shift janitor moved through shadows cast by emergency lighting, her reflection ghosting across bulletproof glass that separated classified briefing rooms from the corridor. 23 years of service had taught her that secrets lived in the spaces between official conversations, in discarded coffee cups, crumpled notes, and the way operators avoided eye contact after certain missions. She paused outside Briefing Room Alpha, where yesterday's tactical planning session had left behind the detritus of war, empty energy drink cans, protein bar wrappers, and a single photograph face down on the conference table. Through the reinforced glass, moonlight caught the edge of something metallic, a challenge coin. Left behind or forgotten, it glinted like a small beacon in the darkness. Vasquez had learned not to look too closely at things that didn't concern her, but the red phone mounted on the wall outside the briefing room had never rung during her shift. Not once in 8 months of mopping these floors, emptying these trash cans, and pretending she didn't understand the fragments of conversation that echoed through ventilation systems. The phone's shrill electronic tone shattered the silence at 3:51 hours. She froze, mop handle trembling in her grip. Red phones didn't ring for janitors. Red phones carried messages that could reshape continents, topple governments, or send teams of America's most lethal warriors into the heart of darkness. The sound continued, urgent, demanding, impossibly loud in the tomb-quiet facility. Paladin 6, immediate authentication required. The automated voice spoke her old call sign. Her breath caught. Paladin 6 had been buried 8 years ago with her Air Force career, along with the classified missions over Afghanistan and the commendation letters that would never see daylight. Now she was just Esperanza Vasquez, invisible in custodial blues, forgotten by a military that had once called her their finest close air support pilot. She approached the phone with the careful movements of someone who understood that certain moments could detonate without warning. Her reflection in the briefing room glass showed a woman the world had written off, graying temples, calloused hands, the patient eyes of someone who had learned to survive by becoming unremarkable. The phone rang again. Through the building's bones, she felt the subtle vibration of elevators moving, security systems engaging, and duty officers stirring from their sleep. Whatever had triggered this call was already setting larger wheels in motion. Vasquez lifted the receiver, her voice steady despite the earthquake building in her chest. Paladin 6, authenticated. The briefing room lights blazed to life automatically. Through the glass, she watched as classified documents materialized on screens throughout the facility, satellite images, flight patterns, target designations that made her pilot's instincts sharpen like a blade finding its edge. Somewhere in those digital displays was a mission that required skills she thought the world had forgotten she possessed. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window beyond the screens. Behind it, dawn was still 3 hours away, but Esperanza Vasquez could already feel the sun climbing toward a horizon she hadn't seen from a cockpit in 8 years. The woman who had once brought thunder from clear skies was about to remember why they called her Paladin. "Ma'am, you need to report to the operations center immediately. Full kit authorization is already processing." The voice on the red phone carried the weight of inevitability. "Welcome back to the fight, Paladin 6." The mission briefing began at 400 hours in a room that smelled of gun, oil, and determination. Deputy Director Morrison sat at the head of the table, his weathered face carrying the gravity of a man who sent America's finest into impossible situations. Around him, 8 SEAL operators studied satellite imagery with the focused intensity of predators analyzing prey. Their gear was already staged: black tactical suits, night vision, weapons that could punch through armor or whisper death from 1,000 meters. Vasquez entered wearing the same custodial uniform that had rendered her invisible for 8 months. The operators glanced up briefly, confusion flickering across their faces before training reasserted itself. They had learned not to question the presence of support staff during classified briefings. She took a seat at the back of the room, notebook in hand, playing the role of someone taking meeting minutes. "Gentlemen, Operation Shepherd's Hook launches in 6 hours." Morrison's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Intelligence indicates a high-value target has been located in a compound 60 kilometers southeast of Kandahar. The package is a Taliban commander who's been coordinating attacks on forward operating bases across 3 provinces." The lead operator, a man whose call sign read Ghost on his name tape, leaned forward. "Sir, the compound is positioned on a ridgeline with clear sight lines in all directions. Standard insertion puts us in a kill funnel." Morrison nodded grimly. "Which is why this operation requires air support that can thread the needle. Close air support that can deliver precision strikes in a space the size of a tennis court, surrounded by civilian structures, while providing cover for extraction under hostile fire." Vasquez felt her pulse quicken. The mission parameters were threading together in her mind like a complex equation. Night insertion, precision engagement, civilian protection protocols. It was the kind of surgical strike that required a pilot who could think 3 moves ahead while pulling 7 Gs in a combat turn. "What assets are available for air support?" Ghost asked, studying the terrain maps. Morrison's eyes found Vasquez across the room, Paladin 6. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 8 pairs of trained killer eyes turned toward the janitor in the back corner. She could read their thoughts in the micro-expressions that flickered across their faces. Confusion, skepticism, then the dawning realization that something significant was shifting beneath the surface of their understanding. "Sir," Ghost's voice carried the careful neutrality of a man who had learned to trust chain of command, even when logic suggested otherwise. "Paladin 6 holds the record for most successful close air support missions in Afghanistan theater. 47 combat sorties, 0 blue-on-blue incidents, and a commendation from General Mattis himself." Morrison's words fell like stones into still water. "She can put ordnance through a window while providing cover fire accurate enough to save your lives without so much as scratching the paint on friendly vehicles." The operators studied Vasquez with new eyes. She could see them reassessing, their tactical minds beginning to understand that the woman they had ignored for months was someone whose skills could mean the difference between mission success and body bags. Ghost spoke first, his tone shifting toward the respectful professionalism reserved for proven warriors. "Ma'am, what's your assessment of the operational parameters?" Vasquez stood, her custodial uniform suddenly feeling like armor. When she spoke, 23 years of military bearing straightened her spine. "The compound's position on the ridgeline provides natural defense, but it also limits escape routes. A properly coordinated air-ground approach can turn that tactical advantage into a trap." The room had transformed. She was no longer the invisible janitor. She was Paladin 6, and these men were listening. The walk to the flight line felt like stepping through a time portal. Vasquez moved through pre-dawn darkness toward the silhouette of an A-10 Thunderbolt II that waited like a sleeping dragon. The aircraft's twin engines and distinctive straight wings cut a familiar profile against the star-scattered sky. For 8 years, she had dreamed about this moment, the return to a cockpit that had once been her second skin. Maintenance crews swarmed over the aircraft, conducting final systems checks with the methodical precision of people whose work kept pilots alive. Chief Warrant Officer Martinez approached with a flight helmet tucked under his arm, and an expression that mixed professional courtesy with barely concealed doubt. "Ma'am, all pre-flight inspections are complete. Aircraft is fully loaded with 30mm rounds and AGM-65 Mavericks." His words were correct, but his tone suggested he was humoring a dangerous delusion. "However, regulations require current flight certification for combat operations." Vasquez accepted the helmet, feeling its familiar weight. The call sign Paladin 6 was still stenciled below the visor in faded white letters, a ghost of the pilot she used to be. "Chief, pull my service record. Full classification access." Martinez hesitated, then spoke into his radio. The minutes that followed stretched like hours. Around them, the flight line buzzed with controlled chaos as dawn approached and mission parameters solidified. SEAL operators conducted final equipment checks while support crews loaded additional ordnance onto attack helicopters. The radio crackled to life. "Chief Martinez, authentication confirmed. Pilot certification current, all special operations clearances active. Flight authorization granted." Martinez's entire demeanor shifted. He straightened to attention, offering a crisp salute that acknowledged not just rank but proven capability. "Ma'am, your aircraft is ready for combat operations." Vasquez climbed into the cockpit, her hands finding controls that responded like extensions of her nervous system. The startup sequence flowed automatically: master switches, engine ignition, hydraulic pressure, weapons systems online. Each switch and button was exactly where muscle memory expected it to be. Through the canopy, she watched the SEAL team loading into their transport helicopter. Ghost caught her eye through the plexiglass and offered a slight nod, professional acknowledgement between warriors who would soon depend on each other for survival. The skepticism was gone, replaced by the kind of trust that only came from understanding someone's proven track record. The tower cleared her for takeoff at 5:15 hours. As the A-10's engine spun up to full power, Vasquez felt something inside her chest unlock, a piece of her identity that had been dormant for 8 years suddenly blazing back to life. The aircraft lifted off into pre-dawn darkness, climbing toward a sky that had once been her domain. Below, the lights of the base fell away like dying stars. Ahead, Afghanistan waited with all its familiar dangers and deadly beauty. Paladin 6 was airborne again, carrying thunder in her wings and 8 years of suppressed purpose burning like aviation fuel in her veins. The mission clock showed 37 minutes to target as Vasquez flew through darkness that felt like coming home. Her aircraft cut through thin air at 18,000 feet, engines humming with the deep throb that had once been her lullaby. The SEAL transport helicopter maintained radio silence 12 miles behind her, running dark and low to avoid detection. "Paladin 6, this is Overwatch. Target area coming into view, bearing 0905 degrees." The voice belonged to a surveillance drone operator seated in a trailer thousands of miles away, watching the battlefield through high-definition cameras that could read license plates from orbit. Vasquez adjusted her flight path, scanning the horizon through night vision that painted the landscape in ghostly green relief. The compound materialized exactly as the briefing photos had shown, a cluster of mud brick buildings perched on a rocky outcrop like an ancient fortress. Thermal imaging revealed heat signatures moving between structures, but distinguishing between combatants and civilians required the kind of judgment that separated competent pilots from legends. "Overwatch Paladin 6, I have eyes on target, counting 6 structures, multiple heat signatures. Request confirmation on civilian status." Paladin 6, intelligence indicates minimal civilian presence, but rules of engagement require positive identification before weapons release. The drone operator's voice carried the weight of protocols written in blood and congressional hearings. She banked into a wide orbit, studying the compound with the patience of a predator. Below, armed figures moved between buildings with tactical awareness, checking corners, maintaining overlapping fields of fire, posting sentries. These weren't farmers or merchants. They moved like soldiers, and their positioning suggested they were expecting trouble. Ghost Leader, Paladin 6. Target appears hostile, heavy, minimal civilian signature. Recommend approach from northwest vector to minimize exposure during insertion. Ghost's voice crackled through encrypted communications. Copy, Paladin 6. Beginning approach run now. Request immediate close air support if things go sideways. The helicopter materialized on her radar, running fast and low across the ridgeline. She watched as rappelling ropes dropped from its belly and 8 black figures descended into darkness like falling angels. The insertion was textbook perfect, quick, silent, and coordinated with military precision that spoke to countless hours of training. Then the compound exploded into chaos. Muzzle flashes strobed through her night vision as automatic weapons opened fire from concealed positions. The Taliban had been waiting, and what should have been a surprise raid had become a deadly trap. Ghost's voice cut through the radio static with controlled urgency that spoke to training asserting itself under fire. Paladin 6, we are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate close air support, coordinates to follow. Vasquez felt her blood turn to ice water and liquid lightning simultaneously. This was the moment that separated simulation from reality, training from legend. 8 American warriors were pinned down in a kill zone, and she was their only lifeline home. She rolled into an attack dive, her aircraft screaming toward Earth with the focused fury of a falling star. The compound rushed up through her targeting sight, growing larger until individual muzzle flashes resolved into specific threats that needed immediate attention. The radio erupted with multiple voices as the battle intensified. Contact left, RPG on the roof. Man down, we need immediate medical evacuation. Paladin 6, danger close fire mission, coordinates grid 779er, 420. Vasquez pulled out of her dive at minimum safe altitude, her aircraft's cannon spitting depleted uranium rounds that turned mud brick into dust and enemy positions into memory. But the compound was larger than it had appeared from altitude, with more defensive positions than intelligence had suggested. This wasn't going to be a quick surgical strike. This was going to be a sustained air-ground battle, requiring every skill she had learned in 8 years of combat flying. She climbed for another attack run, adrenaline singing in her veins like high-octane fuel. Through her headset, she could hear Ghost coordinating his team's movements while taking incoming fire. Professional voices maintaining tactical discipline even as the situation deteriorated into controlled chaos. Paladin 6, we are combat effective but trapped in Building 3. Multiple enemy positions between us and extraction point. Can you clear a path? She studied the thermal display, identifying heat signatures, mapping fields of fire, calculating angles that would eliminate threats without endangering the SEAL team. It was a 3-dimensional chess game played at supersonic speeds with lethal consequences for wrong moves. Ghost Leader, I can put ordnance exactly where you need it, but I need you to paint targets with laser designation. Mark your position and mark threats in order of priority. Her second attack run sent Maverick missiles into 2 enemy positions with surgical precision that eliminated the immediate threat without damaging adjacent structures. But the compound's defenders were adapting, repositioning to counter her attacks while maintaining pressure on the pinned SEAL team. This was becoming exactly the kind of prolonged engagement that could go wrong in a dozen different ways. And somewhere in the chaos, Paladin 6 found herself remembering why she had earned her reputation as a pilot who could thread impossible needles while carrying American warriors safely home. The battle had been raging for 17 minutes when Vasquez realized the compound was larger than anyone had anticipated. What intelligence had described as a simple Taliban stronghold was revealing itself to be a multi-level complex with underground tunnels connecting buildings that appeared separate from the air. Every position she neutralized seemed to spawn 2 more firing points. Paladin 6, we've got movement in tunnels beneath our position. Ghost's voice carried the controlled tension of a professional warrior facing an evolving threat. Unknown number of hostiles, possibly attempting to flank our position. She banked hard left, studying thermal imaging that showed heat signatures moving through what appeared to be solid earth. The compound had been designed as a fortress, with defensive positions that could be abandoned and reoccupied as tactical situations changed. It was the kind of sophisticated military engineering that suggested this wasn't just a Taliban hideout. It was a strategic command center. Ghost, be advised. Target appears to be hardened facility with extensive underground components. This may be a larger operation than briefed. Copy that, Paladin 6. We're finding documents and equipment that suggest major planning operations. This isn't just a safe house, it's a command and control center. Vasquez processed this information while lining up her next attack run. A command center meant higher value targets, which meant stronger defenses, which meant the enemy would fight harder to protect whatever was hidden in those underground chambers. The mission parameters had just shifted from a simple raid to a complex assault on a strategic target. Her aircraft's ammunition counter showed she was down to 60% of her cannon rounds and had expended half her missiles. In a prolonged engagement, ammunition management became as critical as tactical positioning. She needed to make every shot count while ensuring she had enough ordnance left to cover the SEAL team's extraction. Overwatch, Paladin 6. Request immediate resupply and additional air assets. Target is larger and more heavily defended than intelligence indicated. Paladin 6. Additional assets are 40 minutes out. Can you maintain station until reinforcement arrives? 40 minutes. In air combat, that was a lifetime. Her fuel gauge showed enough for another 25 minutes of combat flying before she would need to consider bingo fuel calculations. The mathematics were harsh but simple. She could stay and fight until her tanks ran dry, or she could withdraw and leave 8 American warriors trapped in an increasingly desperate situation. Through her headset, she heard Ghost coordinating defensive positions while treating wounded team members. Professional voices, maintaining military bearing despite circumstances that were deteriorating with each passing minute. These men trusted her to keep them alive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Ghost leader, I can give you 25 minutes of continuous air support. After that, we'll need to discuss extraction options. Understood, Paladin 6. 25 minutes to turn this situation around. She rolled into another attack dive, this time targeting what appeared to be a communications antenna on the compound's highest building. If she could disrupt their ability to coordinate defensive positions, it might give the SEAL team the tactical advantage they needed to reach their extraction point. The missile strike eliminated the antenna in a shower of sparks and debris, but almost immediately she noticed that enemy fire patterns weren't changing. They had backup communications, probably hardened against exactly this kind of attack. Whoever had designed this compound had planned for sustained combat against air assets. It was going to be a long 25 minutes. At 18 minutes remaining, Vasquez made a decision that would have violated every safety protocol in the pilot's handbook. The SEAL team was pinned down in a courtyard with limited cover, taking fire from elevated positions that her high-altitude attacks couldn't effectively neutralize. The enemy had positioned themselves in structures too close to friendly forces for standard close air support procedures. She pushed her aircraft into a dive that brought her below the compound's ridgeline, flying through the kind of terrain that turned aircraft into expensive craters. At this altitude, her plane became vulnerable to small arms fire, but it also gave her attack angles that could eliminate threats without endangering the SEAL team. Paladin 6, you are danger close to small arms engagement envelope. Overwatch's voice carried alarm that penetrated even encrypted communications. Recommend you maintain safe altitude. Negative, Overwatch. Friendlies require immediate close support that can only be provided from low altitude. I have the aircraft control to maintain tactical positioning. She pulled up just above the compound's walls. her cannon raking across enemy positions with precision that came from 23 years of training and 8 years of dreaming about this moment. Muzzle flashes winked out as her depleted uranium rounds eliminated threats one by one, creating corridors of safe movement for the pinned SEAL team. Ghost Leader, you have clear path to Building 7. Enemy positions neutralized on your direct route. Copy Paladin 6, moving now. She watched through her targeting system as 8 figures moved across the courtyard with tactical precision, each man covering others while advancing toward their extraction point. But her low-altitude attack had attracted attention from heavy weapons positions she hadn't detected from higher altitude. The first RPG missed her aircraft by less than 50 feet, its explosion close enough to rattle instruments in her cockpit. The second one forced her into an evasive maneuver that brought her aircraft within inches of the compound's radio tower. Flying at this altitude was like threading a needle while riding a lightning bolt. Paladin 6, you're taking heavy ground fire. Recommend immediate altitude adjustment. But the SEAL team was moving, advancing through corridors of safety her attacks had created. They were 30 seconds from their extraction point, 30 seconds from survival. She couldn't abandon them now, not when they were so close to completing their mission and reaching safety. Her fuel gauge showed 13 minutes remaining. Her ammunition counter displayed 30%. The mathematics of survival were becoming increasingly unforgiving, but Ghost and his team were almost home. Ghost Leader, how copy on extraction timeline? Paladin 6, we are 15 seconds from extraction point. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it for 15 more seconds. She banked into one final attack run, expending her last 2 missiles on positions that threatened the extraction zone. The explosions lit up the compound like daylight, temporarily blinding enemy gunners and creating the window of confusion the SEAL team needed to reach safety. Ghost Leader is secure at extraction point, beginning exfiltration now. Vasquez pulled her aircraft up from the deadly low-altitude environment, climbing toward air that wouldn't kill her if she made a single navigation error. Below, the compound continued burning from her attacks, orange flames flickering against the pre-dawn sky like candles in a violent cathedral. Her radio crackled with a new voice, the incoming air support finally arriving on station. Paladin 6, this is Thunder 1-1. We have eyes on target area and are prepared to assume close air support responsibilities. She looked at her fuel gauge, 8 minutes remaining, just enough to reach the nearest airbase if she flew a direct route and prayed her engines didn't develop problems. The responsible decision was to hand off the mission and head for friendly territory. But through her radio, she heard Ghost coordinating his team's movement toward the helicopter extraction point. They were still in hostile territory, still vulnerable, still depending on air cover to reach safety. The job wasn't finished until every American warrior was safely airborne and heading home. Thunder 1-1, Paladin 6 maintaining station until friendlies are safely extracted. You can assume backup responsibilities. Copy Paladin 6, we have your back if you need it. She banked into a protective orbit around the extraction site, watching as the SEAL transport helicopter descended through darkness to pick up 8 warriors who had completed an impossible mission against overwhelming odds. Her fuel gauge showed 5 minutes remaining, barely enough to reach friendly territory if everything went perfectly. The helicopter lifted off at 6:23 hours, carrying Ghost and his team toward safety. Through her headset, she heard Ghost's voice one final time. Paladin 6, this is Ghost Leader. Mission complete, all personnel accounted for. Thank you for bringing us home. Those words hit harder than any commendation or medal could have. This was why she had learned to fly, why she had spent 23 years in military service, why she had endured 8 years of invisibility while sweeping floors and emptying trash cans. This moment, when American warriors reached safety because of skills she had never stopped hunting, made every sacrifice worthwhile. She turned her aircraft toward the nearest friendly airbase, fuel gauge showing 3 minutes remaining. The sun was beginning to rise over Afghanistan's mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that she had missed more than breathing during her 8 years away from the cockpit. Paladin 6 was finally coming home. The emergency landing at Forward Operating Base Chapman occurred with exactly 37 seconds of fuel remaining in her tanks. Vasquez rolled to a stop on the runway as her engines began the cooling cycle that signaled the end of a mission that had redefined her understanding of her own capabilities. Ground crews surrounded her aircraft immediately, conducting post-flight inspections that revealed 17 small arms impacts on her fuselage and wings. She climbed out of the cockpit feeling like someone who had been resurrected from the dead. Every muscle ached with the residual tension of combat flying, and her flight suit was soaked with perspiration from 3 hours of aerial warfare. But beneath the physical exhaustion was something she hadn't felt in 8 years. The deep satisfaction that came from executing a mission that had required every skill she possessed. Chief Martinez approached with an expression that mixed professional respect with something approaching awe. "Ma'am, preliminary damage assessment shows your aircraft took multiple hits but maintained full operational capability. You brought her home despite flying through a small arms engagement envelope that should have been lethal." She walked around her aircraft, studying the holes punched through aluminum by enemy bullets that had missed her by inches. Each impact represented a moment when survival had balanced on the edge of a knife blade, when skill and luck had combined to keep her airborne long enough to complete the mission. The debriefing session began at 800 hours in a trailer that smelled of coffee and determination. Ghost and his team sat around a scarred wooden table, their faces showing the aftermath of combat, exhaustion mixed with the relief that came from surviving an engagement that could have killed them all. Their gear was stacked nearby, weapons cleaned and ready for the next mission. Deputy Director Morrison presided over the session with the grim satisfaction of someone whose operational planning had achieved its objectives despite intelligence failures that had nearly turned success into catastrophe. His weathered face showed approval as he studied after-action reports that documented a textbook example of air-ground cooperation under extreme circumstances. "Gentlemen, Operation Shepherd's Hook recovered intelligence that indicates a major Taliban offensive planned for next month. The documents and equipment seized from the compound will allow us to prevent attacks that could have killed hundreds of American and Allied personnel." Ghost leaned forward, his tactical mind already processing implications. "Sir, the compound's defensive capabilities suggest they were planning to use it as a command center for coordinated operations across multiple provinces. We may have disrupted something significantly larger than we realized." Morrison nodded grimly. "Initial document analysis confirms your assessment. This wasn't just a raid. It was a strategic disruption that will have ripple effects across the theater of operations." All eyes turned toward Vasquez, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, still processing the morning's events. For 8 years, she had been invisible, forgotten, relegated to the margins of an organization that had once valued her skills above gold. Now she found herself at the center of an operation that would be studied in tactical schools for decades. "Paladin 6, Morrison said formally, "your performance this morning exemplifies the highest standards of military aviation. Flying danger-close support missions in contested airspace while coordinating with ground elements represents air-ground cooperation at its finest." Ghost stood and approached her with the measured movements of someone offering respect between warriors. "Ma'am, speaking for my team, you brought us home when the situation went to hell. That kind of precision flying under fire is the reason we're all still breathing." She accepted his handshake, feeling something inside her chest unlock completely for the first time in 8 years. This was recognition not from bureaucrats or politicians, but from operators who measured competence in life-and-death terms. Their approval carried weight that no official commendation could match. "It was an honor flying for you," she replied, and meant every word. The flight back to DEVGRU headquarters occurred in an aircraft that felt different somehow, as if the morning's mission had fundamentally altered her relationship with flying itself. She was no longer a pilot trying to reclaim past glory. She was Paladin 6, proven in current combat, carrying fresh credentials written in cordite and aviation fuel. The base appeared through her windscreen like a promise kept. As she lined up for final approach, Vasquez realized that everything had changed during those 3 hours of combat flying. She was returning not as a forgotten veteran trying to recapture past relevance, but as an operator whose skills had been tested in current conflict and found adequate for America's most critical missions. The touchdown was smooth as silk, her aircraft kissing the runway with the gentle precision that came from thousands of hours of experience. As she taxied toward the flight line, ground crews waited with expressions that mixed professional curiosity with something approaching reverence. Word had already spread about the morning's mission. In military communities, news of exceptional performance traveled faster than radio waves, carried by the informal networks that connected professionals who understood the difference between competence and legend. She shut down her engines and sat in the cockpit for a long moment, listening to metal cooling and systems powering down. Through the canopy, she could see Deputy Director Morrison approaching with several senior officers she didn't recognize, men whose uniforms bore insignia indicating they made decisions that affected entire theaters of military operations. This was the moment when invisible janitors became visible assets, when forgotten pilots remembered why they had learned to fly, when 8 years of patient waiting transformed into vindication that tasted sweeter than anything she had ever experienced. Paladin 6 unbuckled her restraints and prepared to face whatever came next, knowing that she had already achieved the only victory that mattered, bringing American warriors safely home through skills that no amount of time could diminish. The promotion ceremony occurred 6 weeks later in a hangar that had been hastily decorated with bunting and military flags. Vasquez stood at attention in dress uniform that felt foreign after months of custodial blues, watching as senior officers who had ignored her for 8 years now prepared to pin new insignia on her collar. The irony wasn't lost on her. Recognition often came only after proving capabilities that had never actually disappeared. Colonel Sarah Hendricks, the first female wing commander in Special Operations Command, approached with silver oak leaves that gleamed under industrial lighting. "Captain Vasquez, by order of the Secretary of the Air Force, you are hereby promoted to the rank of Major, with all rights and responsibilities thereto." The weight of new rank felt substantial on her collar, but not as significant as the presence of Ghost and his SEAL team in the audience. They had specifically requested permission to attend, wanting to witness the recognition of someone whose skills had saved their lives. Their approval carried more weight than any official ceremony could provide. After the formal proceedings ended, Morrison approached with a manila folder marked with classification stamps that indicated contents requiring the highest levels of security clearance. "Major Vasquez, I have an offer that requires immediate consideration." She accepted the folder, scanning documents that outlined the formation of a new unit designated Special Operations Aviation Command, tasked with providing close air support for America's most sensitive missions. The position being offered was Squadron Commander, responsible for training pilots in the kind of precision flying she had demonstrated during Operation Shepherd's Hook. "Sir, this appears to be an invitation to institutionalize the capabilities we discovered during the mission." "Exactly. We need someone who can train pilots to perform the kind of danger-close support that saved Ghost's team. Someone who understands that precision flying isn't just about technical skill. It's about the willingness to risk everything for the warriors on the ground." The assignment would mean leaving behind 8 years of invisibility and accepting responsibility for developing the next generation of special operations pilots. It was an opportunity to ensure that future missions would have air support capable of threading impossible needles while bringing American warriors safely home. She thought about the morning 6 weeks ago when she had climbed out of the cockpit after flying through small arms fire that should have been lethal. Every bullet hole in her aircraft had represented a moment when survival balanced on skill, determination, and the kind of precision that came from refusing to accept acceptable casualties among friendly forces. "Sir, I accept the assignment." Morrison smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose operational instincts had identified exactly the right person for an impossible job. "Major, your first class of student pilots reports next Monday. They're all volunteers from various special operations units, all requesting training in close air support techniques. Apparently, word has spread about what happened during Shepard's Hook." Ghost approached after the official conversation ended, carrying something wrapped in brown paper. "Ma'am, the team wanted you to have this." Inside the wrapping was a combat knife with Paladin 6 engraved on the blade and the SEAL Team's unit insignia on the handle. It was the kind of gift that warriors gave only to someone they considered worthy of carrying their trust into battle. "This means more to me than the promotion," she told him honestly. "Ma'am, it should. Rank comes from bureaucrats, trust comes from blood." The sun was setting over the flight line as Vasquez walked toward her quarters, new oak leaves catching the last light of day. Behind her, maintenance crews prepared aircraft for night missions, their voices carrying the comfortable sounds of professionals maintaining the tools of their trade. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, and the opportunity to pass hard-won knowledge to pilots who would carry American warriors into future battles. But tonight, she was content to walk through base housing as Major Esperanza Vasquez, Squadron Commander Designate, her reflection no longer showing an invisible janitor, but a proven warrior whose skills had been tested in current combat and found adequate for America's most critical needs. The training program began on a Monday morning that felt like stepping through another time portal. Major Vasquez stood before 12 pilots whose combined flight hours exceeded her own, men and women who had volunteered for additional training in close air support techniques that pushed aircraft and crews beyond standard operational parameters. Their faces showed the professional skepticism of people who had seen enough combat to question anyone claiming superior knowledge. "Ladies and gentlemen, precision close air support isn't about flying skills, those you already possess in abundance. It's about developing the judgment to deliver ordnance in environments where inches matter more than degrees, where hesitation kills friendly forces, and where perfect becomes the only acceptable standard." She moved to a tactical display that showed the Afghanistan compound where Ghost's team had nearly been overrun 6 weeks earlier. The satellite imagery revealed impact craters from her missile strikes, burn patterns from her cannon runs, and the surgical precision that had eliminated threats without damaging adjacent structures. This mission required 17 separate attack runs in contested airspace, with friendly forces positioned within 50 meters of impact zones. Standard safety protocols would have made effective support impossible. Combat effectiveness required flying below minimum safe altitudes while delivering ordnance with surgical precision. Captain Maria Santos, a pilot whose record showed extensive combat experience in Iraq and Syria, raised her hand. "Ma'am, those parameters violate established safety margins by significant factors. How do you maintain aircraft control while operating in small arms engagement envelopes?" It was the right question, asked by someone who understood that theory diverged from practice when American lives hung in the balance. Vasquez smiled, recognizing the kind of professional curiosity that separated competent pilots from those capable of impossible missions. Captain, the answer lies in understanding that safety margins exist to protect equipment, not to limit mission effectiveness. When friendly forces need immediate support, aircraft become expendable assets in service of strategic objectives. The pilot's job is to maximize mission effectiveness while maintaining enough aircraft control to complete the assignment. She spent the next 3 hours walking them through the tactical decisions that had saved Ghost's team, breaking down each attack run into component elements that could be taught, practiced, and internalized. The students took notes with the focused intensity of people who understood they were learning skills that could determine whether future missions ended in success or body bags. Flight training began that afternoon on ranges designed to simulate urban combat environments. Vasquez flew as instructor pilot, demonstrating attack profiles that brought aircraft within meters of simulated friendly positions, while delivering ordnance on targets that required surgical precision. Each demonstration pushed aircraft and crews beyond comfort zones, into realms where perfection became the only acceptable standard. Thunder 2-3, your high and outside optimal attack parameters, she radioed to Lieutenant Colonel James Park, a pilot whose